Sorry, there was a little bit of technical difficulties. So today we are going to be talking about respect and violence, and we're just going to move right in. So the purpose of this presentation is to explore attitudes about violence in intimate relationships and ways to promote respect and resist abuse in one's own relationship. I would like to just provide a disclaimer that this presentation includes readings and discussion around the topic of domestic violence and physical violence. So we acknowledge that this content is sensitive and may be difficult, so please feel free to exit the presentation at any time. Care to Prevent really encourages everyone to care for their safety and well-being. So we shall begin. So this is pretty much the agenda. These are going to be the primary things that we kind of address. So starting with power and control, healthy relationships are based on equality and respect, while abusive ones are based on power and control. And then in this presentation, you'll see the inclusion of individuals who identify as LGBTQIA+, in which abuse in same-sex and opposite-sex relationships is not fundamentally different. It's still about one partner using destructive behaviors to control the other. And then respect and resisting abuse. Many people believe victims of domestic violence share some common effects of abuse by their intimate partners. They make an assumption that victims passively accept violence and lack self-esteem, assertiveness, or boundaries. Much attention is paid to these effects of violence. And I want to add that unfortunately this leads to people having stereotyped negative views of the victims. I do also want to put in there that the language is interchangeable. You'll often hear me say victims or survivors, because individuals who are experiencing violence or abuse of any shape or form can be considered as such. But anyways, going back to the respect and resisting abuse, looking at what victims do to oppose abuse and to keep their, more or less dignity, we hope people will form a more accurate view of victims or survivors of violence. And then we also hope that survivors will reconsider any feelings that they're feeling, such as feeling damaged, and instead look at the strengths they have and that you guys have, really shown in resisting abuse. This is just a quote. Your value doesn't decrease based on someone's inability to see your worth. Okay, just going into a little bit of statistics. On average, nearly 20 people per minute are physically abused by an intimate partner in the United States. During 1 year, this equates to more than 10 million women and men. 1 in 4 women and 1 in 9 men experience severe intimate partner and physical violence. Intimate partner contact, sexual violence, and/or intimate partner stalking with impacts such as injury, fearfulness, PTSD, use of victim services, contraction of sexually transmitted diseases, etc. Intimate partner violence accounts for 15% of all violent crime. Women between the ages of 18 to 24 are most commonly abused by an intimate partner. Transgender victims or survivors are more likely to experience intimate partner violence in public, and LGBTQIA, Black, African American victims are more likely to experience physical intimate partner violence compared to those who do not identify as Black or African American. So this is a power and control wheel, and it essentially shares the various variables of what an individual may use as power and control. And so the power and control wheel is a tool that helps explain the different ways an abusive partner can use power and control to manipulate a relationship. So domestic violence is a pattern of controlling behavior used to maintain power in a relationship by one partner or the other. And while women are disproportionately victims, men and LGBTQIA individuals are also victims of domestic violence. And also, while each case is unique, abusers use a range of abusive behavior to control their patterns, including physical, emotional, psychological, sexual, financial, and spiritual abuse, which you can see in this power and control wheel on the screen. And often it's very difficult to identify various forms of abuse, particularly when they're not, direct or not as obvious as physical or sexual violence. So really this wheel can be a tool, and it can definitely inform individuals who may have friends or family or colleagues potentially experiencing any type of violence. And so this wheel really helps you learn about the main forms of domestic violence. There also is a LGBTQ power and control wheel. As I mentioned in the last slide, domestic violence is not limited to heterosexual relationships and can affect individuals of all sexual orientations and genders. So within the LGBTQ community, intimate partner violence occurs at a rate equal and often even higher than that of the heterosexual community. LGBTQ individuals they experience unique forms of intimate partner violence, as well as distinctive barriers to seeking help due to a fear of discrimination or bias. And I'd also like to add that although the response to LGBTQ victims of domestic violence is gradually improving, we still have a lot of work to do. The LGBTQ community is often met with ineffective responses or victimizing legal responses. It's complicated. So people who have never been abused often wonder why a person wouldn't just leave an abusive relationship. They don't understand that breaking up can be more complicated than it seems. And I would like for individuals to acknowledge that. If you have a friend or, a friend in an unhealthy abusive relationship, support them and let them know that, you're there for them, but also support them by understanding why they may not want to be, why they may not want to, what am I trying to say? Essentially, why they may not want to or be able to leave. That's what I'm trying to say. So these are the primary variables as to why someone in a violent or abusive relationship may not leave, cannot physically leave. And these are important things to be informed about because it really, shapes an idea of what, survivors are really going through. So we have fear. One may be afraid of what will happen if they decide to leave the relationship. If someone has been threatened by their partner, their family, or friends, they may not feel safe leaving. And then, of course, we have fear of being outed, which is, I think this is important because someone is LGBT, if someone is LGBTQ and has not yet come out to everyone, their partner may threaten them by, hey, I'm going to reveal this secret. And, being outed may feel especially scary for young individuals. Just going back to our statistics, the ages 18 through 24 are the most common, disproportionate rates of domestic violence and intimate partner violence occur within that demographic of age. I accidentally skipped love, my apologies. But, one may stay in a abusive relationship, hoping that their abuser will change. If a person loves you and, if a person tells you that they love you, you want to assume that they'll change. You want to believe them. So some may only want the violence to stop, not for the whole relationship to end. And that's understandable. Then we have social and peer pressure. If the abuser is popular, it can be hard for a person to tell their friends. And basically that just means like maybe nobody will believe them, or that everyone will take the abuser side because they're all friends with the abuser. And then we have cultural and religious reasons. Traditional gender roles can make it difficult for young women to admit to being sexually active and for young men to admit to being abused. One cultures or religions may influence them to stay rather than end the relationship for fear of bringing up shame upon their family. We also have pregnancy and parenting. Some may feel pressure to raise their children with both parents together, even if that means staying in a violent relationship. Also, the violent partner may threaten to take or harm the children if they leave. And then, of course, we have, let's skip to distrust. The distrust of police. Many people don't feel that the police can help them or will help them, so they don't report their abuse. Language barrier, immigration status. If someone is undocumented, they may fear that reporting the abuse will affect their immigration status. Also, it's important to keep in mind if their first language isn't English, it can be difficult to express the depth of their situation, or what is going on in their situation. We also have fiscal dependency. Essentially, some are financially dependent on their violent partner for survival. And without money, it can seem impossible for them to leave the relationship. This feeling of helplessness can especially be strong if the person lives with their abusive partner. And then we also have nowhere to go. Even if someone thinks they can leave, some may think they simply just have nowhere to go or no one to turn to once they've ended their relationship with the abusive partner. This feeling of helplessness can be especially strong if the person lives with their partner once again. And lastly, we have disability. One may be physically dependent on their abusive partner. They can feel that their well-being is connected to the relationship. It's simple. And this dependency could heavily influence his or her decision or their decision to stay in an abusive relationship or violent relationship. And I just wanted to add some key components specifically related to the LGBTQ community. These are just several barriers that exist to address to addressing LGBTQ intimate partner violence. So societal beliefs that domestic violence does not occur in LGBTQ relationships, potential homophobia from staff or service providers, or from non-LGBTQ domestic violence victims they may come in contact with, lack of appropriate training regarding LGBTQ domestic violence for service providers. Domestic violence shelters are typically female only, and transgender individuals may not be allowed entrance due to their gender, genitals, or legal status. The lack of or survivors being unaware of LGBTQ-friendly assistant resources, and low levels of confidence in the effectiveness of the legal system for LGBTQ people. You, yourself, as much as anybody in the entire universe, deserves your love and affection. Buddha. And getting into resisting abuse, respect, and empowerment. I think I want to start by saying a perpetrator's abusive behavior is their responsibility. They're the only ones who can stop the abuse. And resistance is one of the many ways to escape the abuse in itself. I do want to put a little disclaimer. I'm not talking about physically resisting, like if you are in a violent or abusive, situation. I'm not saying, to fight back, because sometimes, that could put an individual in great danger. I do also want to say that these recommendations that are on the screen have been recommended by licensed professionals, not me. So I do want to put that disclaimer. But going back to this idea of resistance, I'm not talking about physical resistance. I'm talking about opposing abuse more or less passively, which could potentially be life-saving. I want survivors to feel empowered when they focus on their resistance in the face of their mistreatment. So the following are some potential ways one can resist abuse while attempting to preserve, self-worth and respect for oneself, and also staying safe in the situation that they're in, if there's no means to exit. So, for example, if an abuser attempts or tries to isolate you, a suggestion by professionals has been to attempt to retain some relationship with others, reflecting on good times with loved ones. So what I think of when I'm talking about isolation is you may be able to keep the relationship with a friend by talking to them when when the abuser is not present. Or if, take it a step further, if they're not allowing you to speak to your friends, if you're able to acquire a phone or something or chat, maybe you can do this while they're asleep or out. So that's what I mean by this idea of like ways to essentially, for lack of a better term, make the most of the situation safely. And so moving on to humiliation, think or act in ways that sustain your self-love, respect, and dignity. So for example, if your abuser has humiliated you, something that may work in the sense of, telling yourself silently or in your head, like, you got this, this isn't true, you're a powerful woman or individual. I'm only saying women because I identify as a woman. But, stand tall, you can do this, you can get through this. Really just motivating yourself from within. Going into control, attempt to find things to do to avoid your partner as much as possible. I understand that can be difficult or actually impossible. But if it is possible, for example, if you're a stay-at-home mom and you have children in an abusive situation, it's not just you. You could potentially find ways to be out of the house if you're able to leave the house. For the kids, you can use the kids. So example, going to the grocery store, going to the park if the weather is okay, actually being able to see your parents. This is all if you can leave the house. Or like something like if they're very controlling and they say, I need you to clean the entire house, and they give you specific tasks and it better be like this, etc., etc. You can, based on how your abuser responds to things, only you know whether it's best to retaliate essentially by not doing anything, or actually finding a bunch of tasks to keep yourself busy so that you are avoiding them as much as possible. So this person tells you to clean the house. I want you to do this. I want you to do that. If taking on additional tasks that you find other than what they have stated, then maybe, maybe that's the right path to go. So for example, if someone told me, and my abuser was like, I need you to mop this floor, clean this bathroom, fold this, take this out of the oh no, what happened? Technical difficulties. Just kidding. Sorry, guys. But essentially finding additional tasks to avoid your partner as much as possible. Going into guilt, we have respond as minimally as possible. And once again, I do want to acknowledge that this is not always applicable to every individual in violent of a violent relationship. So this recommendation is to respond as minimally as possible, but they may also get upset for you not responding. This is just something that has been recommended by a number of licensed professionals. So this idea of guilt is, they blame you for their abuse and they deflect responsibility by essentially like what I'm saying as far as respond as minimally as possible is deflecting responsibility by not saying anything at all, staying quiet, and really just letting them talk, if that will get you out of the situation quicker and safely. And then there's physical abuse, participating in things that reduce or escape the pain. If that means in your situation to comply with demands, potentially agreeing with the abuser, or, really just dissociating yourself during that event, if that's what it takes. And I think that's it for that. This is a question I posed if we were actually doing this presentation with a live audience. It would be, do you think it's possible to form an intimate relationship based on respect? What can we do individually to create a healthy, intimate relationship? And I want to specifically add, do you think it's possible to form to establish respect within a violent, intimate relationship? And what does that look like? Are you setting boundaries? Can you even set boundaries with a violent offender, an abuser? And for individuals that have been in these violent relationships, what have you done to set some sort of I guess, once again, boundaries between you guys, if at all. I do want to say that I do want to bring up this idea of love also, thinking about a relationship in general, that, love can be involved. I mentioned it previously, like, love may be a reason individuals, stay, and that's completely okay. But some people consider love to be respect, but I believe that the two are not the same. And you can have respect for someone you don't even like at all. And I guess what I'm trying to say is you could love someone but not respect them. So I'll always take the time to get to know a potential partner and watch for patterns of behavior in a variety of settings. And as a result, I think this might potentially lower your risk of being involved in an abusive relationship. Just if you keep in touch in the beginning, of course, if you're in the beginning of a relationship or even prior to a relationship and you're speaking to someone. But I think it's also important that you keep in touch with your support system, maintain your self-identity, and practice good self-care. And so going into this, some key components, attempt to make your mental health and physical health a priority. If possible, take care of your needs. Do something that will help you think positive and affirm who you are. Be sure to get an appropriate amount of rest, if you can, of course, and eat healthy meals, or just eat something that'll just make you feel better. I really think that these simple self-care steps can go a long way in helping you deal with the day-to-day stress of one that's going through abuse. And then going into, an important one, you're not at fault. If you've been in an abusive relationship for any amount of time, you may believe that there's something severely wrong with you. Some people, I've had friends, to disclose a little bit, I've had friends in violent relationships, and something that came up is why would someone act, who says they love you, act like that? But you're not the problem. Abuse is a choice, and keeping this in mind may help, that this is not your fault and abuse is a choice. Don't blame yourself and don't excuse your partner's behavior. And then, most importantly, create a safety exit plan. Starting off, it's essential to build outside resources and talk about what's going on in your relationship. A professional is the best person because you can rebuild yourself and learn how to help yourself without feeling judged or rushed into taking action. And, of course, we need to acknowledge the obvious. Leaving an abuser can be dangerous. And, if we are creating a safety plan or exit plan, you want to consider taking various precautions. So some of these precautions include calling a shelter or domestic violence hotline for advice. Make the call at a safe time when the abuser is not around, or from a friend's house or another safe location. Pack an emergency bag that includes items that you'll need when you leave, such as, like extra clothes, keys. Leave the bag in a safe place. Keep important papers, money, any prescription medications on you, so that you can take them or have them on short notice if you need to leave or have an opportunity. And of course, know exactly where you'll go and how you'll get there. Use your phone or computer cautiously. Make sure that you're deleting your history, your search history on your phone or your laptop. I think changing your passwords is also important, especially if your abuser was an individual who's very controlling and had access to all your social media or emails. Make sure you change your passwords. And also remove tracking info if that's a thing in your situation. So, for example, I have an iPhone and I have Find My iPhone. That way, if someone has my iCloud information and password, they can log in and see exactly where my phone is. So you want to disable that, and you can do that by going into the settings. I'm pretty sure Android devices or other devices have the same thing. And sometimes they're as easy as just turning off your location. So just something to acknowledge. And then I do also want to say that I want to acknowledge that the decision to leave an abusive relationship is not easy. Even after some individuals, survivors in these situations, have these huge moments of excuse my language, but essentially, if you've ever had that moment, fuck this, I can't do this anymore. This is it. I'm going to do this. It's not, basically what I'm saying, it's not simple. So this idea of individuals saying that if they treat you so badly, why don't you just leave? Making the decision to leave requires a tremendous inner strength and courage. Someone is making the decision against nearly insurmountable odds. And so we need to remember that. And then on top of that, this horrible state of learned helplessness and the same feelings of loss that everyone feels at the end of a relationship, which I want individuals to know are magnified in a healthy codependence of an abuser-victim relationship. Abusers have routinely threatened to hunt down and kill survivors if they try to escape. They even threaten or hurt or even kill a victim's family member, friends, or even children. An abuser could threaten to take custody of the victim's children. On top of this, victims often have no money or support network, as the abuser has severed their ties to the world outside of the relationship. So these survivors are stuck in a torturous cycle of being emotionally, mentally, physically abused, forced to do things, and believing that there's no way out other than to risk their abuser inflicting pain and possibly death upon themselves and even everyone they love. So I just wanted to acknowledge that because it takes the type of courage that most people have never had to summon in their entire lives to leave an established abusive relationship, or not even established abusive relationship, no matter what the cost. So just something to remember. And these are the resources. We have the Domestic Violence Hotline, the National Sexual Assault Hotline, another Hopeline network, Human Trafficking Resource Center. Polaris is a wonderful resource. Once again, I'm sorry, this keeps doing things I don't want it to do. And then we also have the National Resource Center on Domestic Violence, Futures Without Violence, Love is Respect Hotline, Break the Cycle, National Network for Immigrant and Refugee Rights, as well as the National Center on Domestic Violence, Trauma, and Mental Health. Most of these hotlines, if I'm pretty sure almost all of them, aside from maybe one, are 24 hours, and you also have the option to text some of them. And that is it, my friends. Thank you so much, and I hope to speak to you guys soon.